Hello there. Today, for my special artist tribute, I am going to be profiling the youngest sibling of the Jackson family, and that is Janet Damita Jo Jackson, who is going to be turning 48 years old today. Now, I think a lot of us probably first remember Janet as playing Penny in the Norman Lear TV series Good Times, but she was also famous for doing her impressions of Mae West and different Hollywood movie stars during the Jackson 5's 1974 Las Vegas variety show. In the early 80s, she started to show an interest in music while starring in different strokes, and she made and released her debut album on A&M. I actually, back in the 90s, get a red insert in this album for some reason. Her debut album for A&M, and it's simply called Janet Jackson. As you can see, she was 16 years old during this time. Here's a somewhat more accurate picture of her during that era. This album was produced by Leon Silvers. Sorry for the broken jewel case, but it's very much in the league of a Stacey Lattisaw kind of solar, soul type of youthful pop funk record. My favorite numbers on this are Say You Do and, to a lesser degree, Young Love. The first one sounds a lot like what her brother Michael was doing at that time. And Don't Mess Up This Good Thing. You hear on that song the beginning of sort of an influence of the Minneapolis sound. And on the somewhat more new wave influence closer, Come Give Your Love to Me, you can sort of hear that this is an artist that is actually looking to be very diversified, and she had a chirpy but pretty strong voice, actually. Now, her next album, which came out in 1984, was called Dream Street. She was married to James DeBarge during this period. They eloped. She was 18, and she was starring in the TV series of Fame at this point. I really like this album. Her brother Marlon helped produce this, and the Times' Jesse Johnson. So her journey in Minneapolis really began here. There's a picture of Janet on her gyro scooter there. I love this album. Don't Stand Another Chance. Pretty Boy is definitely a Minneapolis influence cut. And Hold Back the Tears was produced by Giorgio Moroder and Pete Bellotte of Donna Summer fame. There's a lot of great dance material on here. Very funky stuff like All My Love to You, If It Takes All Night. The title track, Dream Street, was actually used in Fame. That particular song was, very illustrative of a young woman trying to find her place in the world and her dreams. And Communication and Fast Girls are two other great numbers. So people think that her Minneapolis journey started after this, but this was really the beginning of where it started. Really, really underrated album. If you like Prince and Janet Jackson's vocal style, you'll love this album. The next album, on the other hand, really broke her through. This is about control. Control of what I say, control of what I do. She left her father behind, went to Minneapolis, and worked with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis on this iconic album. What Have You Done For Me Lately, Nasty Boys, When I Think of You. I mean, most people who grew up in the 80s, this is like a hit parade. This was Janet's Thriller. This was her big album. One of my favorites by her. Actually, I rate this maybe a little bit stronger than Dream Street, but I really put them in the same league. That's right. I think they're both really enjoyable and excellent albums. The next one came out in 1989, was Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation. Now, during the 1990s, a lot of people claimed, yeah, we love this album, but some of the social references on this album are clumsy. But I have to give Janet credit for making people music in the late 80s. She talked about poverty, illiteracy, and racial issues on this album. And again, there were a lot of great hits on this album. Rhythm Nation itself, which looped Thank You For Letting Me Be Myself by Sly. And, of course, Escapade, which is a great pounding funk number, along with Miss You Much. This album has a more industrial flavor than Control does, and There's also another excellent song on here called Black Cat, which is, I think, one of Janet's only real hard rock type numbers. And Janet delivers it with a really great tough growl, which I really appreciate in a rock song. You know, it's pretty authentic. You know, All Right is a great kind of New Jack Swing number. And State of the World is, I think, a very underrated song from this album as well. Again, great up-tempo material, really expert ballads. The next album began her Virgin career. People who are familiar with Janet Jackson know this cover well. Now, one of the things about Janet Jackson that started with this album and has pretty much continued is her tendency to have about, 9 or 10 tracks on an album and maybe 12 or 13 interludes, less than a minute long, which feature sometimes silence, sometimes a phone ringing, sometimes Janet giggling. I honestly don't know why they're there. But you can actually use a CD programmer to program all this stuff out, because this album from 1993 on Virgin, it's kind of got a custom label there, little navel-gazing action. This has That's the Way Love Goes, You Want This, which actually kind of paralleled, you know, the Supremes' Love Child in the beginning. It sampled a little bit of that. And another song I like called Funky Big Band, which is a great up-tempo song. And What'll I Do, which is kind of country-ish, and this time a little more alternative rock-friendly. I like Anytime, Any Place on this album. It's a kind of a jazzy, kind of proto-neo-soul song, but I prefer R. Kelly's remix of it, to be quite honest with you. But really good album, actually. A lot of good material. She released a greatest hits album in 1996 called Design of a Decade. And my favorite cut on it was Runaway, because it kind of was the beginning of mixing kind of microtonal, you know, East Indian modalities into the song, and had a really strong melody. And it's one of my favorite Janet Jackson songs of all. And this is a CD single with different remixes. The next album, which came out in 1997, was The Velvet Rope. This is a very funky album. It had some good cuts on it, but I really think this is more of a genuine album. Kind of like Control for the 90s. A little more hip-hop influence, but she even featured Joni Mitchell and the Tribe Called Quest Q-Tip on Get It Till It's Gone. And this is a really good album. She was very much sexualizing herself, I must say, though. The next record to come out came out in 2001. Now, All For You looped Changes, The Glow of Love, of course. That was a big hit for her. And this album really gave you this Marvin Gaye-like symphony of Janet Jackson's, which she does really beautifully. So there's a lot of multi-track vocals on this album. Another really good one. In 2004, this album came out, Damita Joe. This particular album, one of the songs samples Herbie Hancock's Hang Up Your Hang-Ups. It's very much a dance album of the period, very electronic stop-start kind of material. Not one of her best, but not one of her worst. This also coincided with her wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl with Justin Timberlake, but I'm not going to get into that. This is actually an import edition, as you can see. The next album, I'm not really that into the cover, to be honest. She released several covers for this. This was not one of the better ones. It's kind of silly. 20 Years Old. This began her relationship musically with her boyfriend, Jermaine Dupri. And this came out around 2006. Not as many interludes on this album, but the sound is a little more generic. But the one thing I noticed is that Janet Jackson is dropping into a lower voice a little bit more on this album. So, you know, that's where that's at. The next album was a similar affair, produced by Jermaine Dupri. It has some somewhat better songs, but again shows some signs of being a little bit formulaic from 2008. Unfortunately, a year later, Michael Jackson died tragically, as you know, and I think that's derailed some of Janet Jackson's recording plans, so that's all she has so far. But happy birthday to Janet Jackson, and I hope to hear some more music from you in the near future, because you are missed, and I think you have another golden age and period coming to you. So happy birthday to Janet, and my condolences to the rest of the Jackson family on the loss of their brother Michael. And as for Janet, like I said, hope to hear from you soon in the record stores. And for the rest of you out there in the audience, I will see you next time.